So there is, I think, a sociological phenomenon that has taken place amongst Klal Yisrael, amongst the Jewish people, and that is that Chanukah is a holiday that is celebrated by all of Klal Yisrael. Right? Almost every single Jew celebrates Hanukkah, right? If we had to, think off the top of our heads of 3 mitzvot that almost every single Jew across the world will engage in, that would be, let's say, Bris Milah, the Pesach Seder, and Hanukkah. Just happened to be the way it fell. It happens to be that Pesach and Bris Milah have something in common, that they actually are the two most severe, at least from the classic biblical sources, the most integral of the positive commandments. So, okay, those I can understand. Hanukkah is a relatively new innovation, only a couple thousand years old. Hanukkah is something, though, that has been accepted by all of Klal Yisrael. So there's this sociological phenomenon that has taken place amongst Jewish people. What's fascinating, though, is that the Rambam himself says that this mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles is the most beloved mitzvah. The most beloved mitzvah. So I'm assuming sociologically it was true in the days of the Rambam as well, but the Rambam is not saying this from a sociological perspective. The Rambam is saying this as a fact. The fact is Hanukkah is the most beloved mitzvah. The question that we are going to be looking into tonight during Life's Biggest Questions is, why is it that Hanukkah is the most beloved mitzvah? So let's take a look at the sources. The source number 1 is where we see the Rambam. If you take a look, arrow number 1 across, we have line number 1 over there. This is in the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. The Rambam's Mishnah Torah was written by the Rambam himself. Rambam lived 1138 to 1204. The Rambam wrote his magnum opus, where basically he saw that there was this issue in that people did not know Torah. People didn't know Torah. There is so much out there when it comes to, there's the Mishnayos, and there's all of the Midrashim, and there is the entire Talmud, and it's just
Where's my wallet?
What the Rambam did was that, you know what, I'm just going to,
My wallet isn't here.
and I'm going to take everything, and I'm going to codify it. I'm going to condense it. I'm going to codify it. I'm going to organize it. That's exactly what he did. He set out 14 volumes where he categorized the entire Talmud, all of the Mishnah, all of the Midrashim, everything. He categorized everything. He broke down to the bottom line halacha, and he basically, on a silver platter, tells you everything you need to know about Torah. Everything. There is A to Z, everything you need to know. In fact, he writes that in the introduction to his work. In the introduction to his work, he writes that I'm going to tell you everything you need to know, everything that there is to know about Torah. Basically, all you're going to need is my book, the Mishnah Torah, which literally means a review of the Torah. And you're going to need my book and a Tanakh and a Bible. That's it. That's all you need to know. When someone makes a statement like that, so then, especially in Judaism, that is that is the golden ticket for everybody to jump on him. And in fact, to this day, there have been no more works in Jewish literature written about any other book, no other commentaries, no more commentaries have been written than commentaries on the book on the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. It's amazing that all of Klal Yisrael saw that as a green flag to, we are now going to argue on everything you have to say. There's a lot more to say about the Rambam, but the Rambam at the end of Hilchos Chanukah over here on page number 1, source number 1, he says mitzvahs ner Chanukah, the mitzvah of lighting Chanukah candles, is mitzvah chaviva hi ad me'od. It is the most beloved mitzvah. Now, why this is so significant, it's not like we're reading a book on Jewish philosophy or Jewish thought. What makes this significant is that the Rambam is writing this not in his Guide for the Perplexed. He's not writing this in the Moreh Nevuchim. He's writing this in the Mishnah Torah, a book in halacha, a book in Jewish law. The Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin Yeshiva, co-Rosh Yeshiva, with his wife's grandfather, the Netziv, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik became Rosh Yeshiva in 1880 at the age of 26 years old, very, very young man, became Rosh Yeshiva, and he really revolutionized the way that Torah study is done, focusing on the Rambam, where he basically he took major concepts out of the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, extrapolated them and analyzed them in light of the Talmud and the major commentaries. The Rabbi Soloveitchik said every single word that's in the Rambam's Mishnah Torah has halachic significance, has significance in Jewish law. So what is the Rambam telling me over here? What is the significance of the fact that Chanukah is the most beloved of all the mitzvot? Why is that halachically significant? Why is that something that's relevant in practical Jewish law? He continues and he says, continue in line number 2, and a person needs to be extremely scrupulous in fulfillment of the mitzvah of Chanukah candles in order to properly tell everybody about the mitzvah of Chanukah, right? Which we are celebrating two miracles. One is the miracle of the military victory. The other is the miracle of the candles. Instead of only lasting one night, the menorah only lasting one night, it lasted for 8 nights. And these are the 2 miracles that we celebrate over Chanukah. And we were able to reestablish the temple in its full service for another 220 years. And then he continues, he says, Ulahosef b'shvach ha'el, continue in line number 3, to give more praise to God, v'hodayalo, and to thank him al hanisim sha'asa lanu, over all of the thanks that, to thank God for all of the miracles that he has performed for us over the generations. Amazing. This is the purpose of lighting Hanukkah candles, and this is why a person needs to be extremely scrupulous in it. And the Rambam mysteriously points out also that it is the most beloved of all the mitzvot. But now we get to the kicker. The Rambam writes at the end of line number 3 by the underline. He says, Afilu, ein lo ma yochal. Even if a person does not have food on their table, they don't have what to eat, elam and tzedakah, meaning that they have to rely on charity for their sustainability, says the Rambam, shoel o mocher ksuso. A person, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles, would need to go to the extent of renting or selling their own shirt in order to get oil and wicks to light Hanukkah candles. Wow. I mean, that's amazing. First of all, we just have to stop and appreciate the scenario the Rambam just painted for us. How much does it cost to light Hanukkah candles? Perhaps the cheapest of all the mitzvahs, just from a financial perspective. We're talking about a scenario over here where a person literally can't afford, I don't know, some wax candles. What does that even cost? $4. They literally did. They cannot extend themselves to, but that they'd have to sell their own shirt in order to acquire Hanukkah candles. I mean, that in of itself is something that you just have to appreciate the severity of the scenario. But the Rambam just set up a really wild application of how important Hanukkah is, to the point that a person would have to sell the shirt off their back in order to fill the mitzvah. Why would the Rambam say such a thing? Where did he get that from? Where did he get this from? So, in order to appreciate where the Rambam got this from, and also appreciate the fact that he said that Hanukkah is the most beloved mitzvah. So let's start with the Gemara and Shabbos. Look at source number 2. Again, we have to figure out why is it that Hanukkah is the most beloved mitzvah. What is significant about that from a point of view of Jewish law? And number 2 is we have to know why is it that a person would have to sell the shirt off their back? Where did the Rambam get that from in order to fill the mitzvah of Hanukkah candles? So take a look at source number 2, the Gemara in Masechet Shabbos. The Gemara in Masechet Shabbos and Daf Chaf Gimel Amud Beis. It comes up, by the way, all of the laws pertaining to Hanukkah all come up in the tractate related to the laws of Shabbos. Comes up pretty tangentially that the Mishnayot over there are discussing the mitzvah of lighting Shabbos candles. And then through there brings up the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles. Hanukkah does not have its own tractate, does not have its own set of discussion in the Mishnayot. It is only brought up, it's only brought up in a backdoor kind of way over here in the laws of Shabbos about lighting Shabbos candles. We discussed lighting Shabbos candles, lighting Hanukkah candles. Okay, so let's take a look over here. Source number 2 across from the arrow, line number 1. Amar Rava. Rava said the following: Pshitali, it's obvious to me that ner beso v'ner Hanukkah, ner beso adif. Let's say a person has to make a choice. Again, describing a very, very unique scenario. A person can only afford one. He can either afford Shabbos candles or Hanukkah candles. Which one is he supposed to spend his money on? So now you might be thinking, what do you mean? Just light one candle. It'll be for both. So that is not an option. Why is it not an option? Because we're not allowed to benefit from the Hanukkah candles. The Hanukkah candles are only for us to look at. We're only, as we say in the paragraph that comes right after the subsequent paragraph, right after we light Hanukkah candles, that we don't have permission to get benefit from them, only to look at them. That's all we do with Hanukkah candles, we only look at them. So over here, if a person is lighting Shabbos candles, which are made for benefit, they can't then be Hanukkah candles. So you have to make a choice here. Are you lighting Hanukkah candles or are you lighting Shabbos candles? So the Gemara says that ner beso, line number 2, ner beso adif. Your Shabbos candles are more important. It's interesting. The Gemara refers to Shabbos candles as ner beso, the lights of your home. Why is it? So the Gemara explains that this is the reason why Shabbos candles win, because mishum shalom beso, because Shabbos candles were designed for shalom bayis. Shabbos candles, just the basic establishment of Shabbos candles. Why do we light Shabbos candles? We light Shabbos candles for one very basic reason, in order so that there could be lights on Shabbos. Think about it. On a Wednesday evening, so you walk into a room and the lights are off. What do? You turn the lights on. Friday night, the lights are off. What do you do? Nothing. Don't turn the lights on. Can't light candles. You do nothing. So what would have happened had we come into Shabbos and all the lights are off and you sit down to your Shabbos meal? Can you pass the soup? Person doesn't even know where the soup, they reach over, they burn their hand, right? They pass over one thing, they trip over another person. Every single Friday night, people are going to be getting into fights. So that's why our rabbi set up this halacha of lighting Shabbos candles in order to make sure that every single Shabbos, the lights are on in the house. In order so that we maintain shalom, we maintain peace in the home every single Shabbos. That was the whole design of Shabbos candles. So having peace in the home beats out lighting Shabbos candles, lighting Hanukkah candles. All right, let's continue. Line number 2. Ner beso v'kiddush hayom. Let's say you have to make a choice. I can only afford either Shabbos candles or wine for kiddush. So which one wins? Same principle is applied. Ner beso adif. Line number 3, by the underline, mishum shalom beso, lighting Shabbos candles is more important because shalom bayis beats everything. Okay, let's continue. By Rava, line number 4. Rava asked the question, ner Chanukah v'kiddush hayom. Let's say you have to make a choice between lighting Hanukkah candles and having kiddush Friday night. So you have enough money for your Shabbos candles, but now you have to make a choice. I either have to light my light my Hanukkah candles, or have kiddush. So which one should I spend my money on? So the Gemara says, Mahu, Kiddush hayom adif de tadir. Do we say that Kiddush is more significant because it's tadir? Tadir is a halachic concept of that if something happens more frequently, so then it has more significance. It's given priority in Jewish law. If something happens more frequently. So Kiddush happens 104 times a year. And Shabbos candles, the Hanukkah candles, happens 8 nights a year, right? So Kiddush presumably would take precedence over Hanukkah candles because it's more frequent. But then the Gemara says, hold on one second. O Dilma, the beginning of the middle of line number 5 by the underline. O Dilma ner Hanukkah adif mishum parsume nisa. Or do we say that Hanukkah candles would take precedence because of parsume nisa? Because it has the element of publicizing the miracle. There's only 3 mitzvot that have this concept of publicizing the miracle. Hanukkah candles, as we just saw before in the Rambam, we light Hanukkah candles in order Tell everybody about this great miracle, to add on more praise to God of these miracles that he has made for the Jewish people, to tell the whole world, right? 4 cups of wine at the Seder. Every time that we lift one of the cups of wine, it's supposed to be reminiscent of the 4 different languages of the redemptive process that God brought us through from the exile through the Exodus to the redemption. That every time we raise one of our cups, where it's like we're making a toast, it's like we're again telling everybody that's around the Seder table about this great miracle. So it's publicizing the miracle. That's the second. Are the 4 cups of wine at the Seder. So we have Hanukkah, those 4 cups of wine at the Seder, and reading of the Megillah at Shul. Reading the Megillah at Shul is also designed to publicize the miracle. So we have these 3 mitzvot, all rabbinic, by the way, are designed in order to publicize the miracle. So over here, the Gemara is saying, well, hold on one second. I understand that Kiddush is more frequent, but Hanukkah has this element of publicizing this wonderful miracle that God did for the Jewish people. Maybe that should win. So let's see how the Gemara concludes. So the Gemara says, line number 7, that Ner Hanukkah adif, that lighting Hanukkah candles is more significant. Mishum Parsumei Nisa. Parsumei Nisa, publicizing the miracle, is going to beat out. Tadir is going to beat out the fact that Kiddush is more frequent, but it doesn't beat out Shalom Bayis. So what we have over here is what it sounds like from the Gemara, that there is one type of mitzvah that really beats almost everything, and that's a mitzvah that is lefarsei menes, to publicize the miracle. And the only thing it's not going to beat is Shalom Bayis. The one thing it's not going to beat, but it will beat everything else. So from here, presumably, says the Maggid Mishnah, from here is probably where the Rambam got his whole source of why it is that you would have to go to such great extents in order to publicize the miracle of Hanukkah, to the point that you'd sell the shirt off your back. Now, the problem with this is the next source. The problem with this is that this is not really in line with generally the way that we assume mitzvot are supposed to be fulfilled. I'll say it the way that the Netziv said it. The Netziv of Lozhin, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, we mentioned before, his wife's grandfather, Reb Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who became the Rosh Yeshiva of the Volozhin Yeshiva in 1853 until its closing in 1892. The Netziv was, in my opinion, the most influential Jew, of the last, in my opinion, the last 300 years. I think for sure. My reasoning for it is that there's not a single yeshiva in the world that cannot trace its roots and influence back to the Netziv. Not a single yeshiva in the world today. Doesn't matter what sect you go to, whether it be religious Zionist, whether it be Haredi. Every single yeshiva in the world is able to trace its roots of influence back to the Netziv. The Netziv was an unbelievable mind. The Netziv, the way he framed it in his seminal work, the Marume Sada, and his commentary on the Talmud, he says that God designed that the way that we are supposed to be able to fulfill mitzvot, we're supposed to be able to live by the Torah, we're supposed to live a fruitful and hopefully meaningful life through the Torah, that we're not supposed to have the Torah bankrupt us, kill us. There's no such thing. Being a Jew, while there are challenges and it's sometimes difficult, but it's supposed to be meaningful and it's not supposed to make you bankrupt. In fact, there's a Gemara that seems to indicate exactly that. If you take a look at source number 3, the Gemara says, Hamevazves, in the middle of the Gemara over here, line number 5, Hamevazves, if someone is looking to spend money on fulfillment of a mitzvah, Al Yevazves Yoser Mechomesh, you're not allowed to spend more than 1/5 of your bank account to fulfill a mitzvah. So let's say, for example, a person wants to buy a lulav and esrog, but unfortunately, they only have $300 in their bank account, and or $300 to their name, and lulav and esrog costs $100. So you're not allowed to buy lulav and esrog that year. That's what it sounds like from the Gemara. And then Netziv says, because God doesn't want us running ourselves too thin. He doesn't want us becoming bankrupt in our fulfillment of mitzvos, because God understands there's a concept of kavod habrios, that we're supposed to be able to live our lives. And I can't live my life spending all of my money on a lulav and esrog. So therefore, I'm not supposed to spend more than a fifth of my bank account. The Gemara then goes on to say, there are even if a person wants to, they can't. You cannot spend more than a fifth of your bank account in order to fulfill a positive commandment. Now, this does not apply to negative commandments. Negative commandments, the Ramah writes in Shulchan Aruch that one would have to spend all of their bank account before violating a negative commandment. When it comes to a negative commandment, you can't cross that line. But in order to build a positive relationship with God, what kind of a positive relationship are you going to be building if you're going to be running yourself bankrupt? So you're not allowed to spend more than a fifth of your bank account. Hold on one second. What was the Rambam scenario before? The Rambam said that a person who cannot afford basic necessities, they'd have to sell the shirt off their back in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Chanukah candles. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. What's going on over here? Why would that be the case? I understand that it's amazing, Parsume Nisa, wonderful, but why would that be the reason of publicizing the miracles? Enough of a reason to sell the shirt off your back? So what's going on over here? I thought that it's against basic Jewish fundamental ideas, that you have to be able to live by the mitzvahs, not die by the mitzvahs. You're supposed to live by them. You're supposed to be able, you can't run yourself so thin. So the Maggid Mishnah was one of the early commentators on the Rambam, very early commentator on the Rambam. Early defender, I should say. There were earlier commentators, but they were not the friends of the Rambam. This is the first friend of the Rambam, going back to the middle of the 15th century. The Maggid Mishnah points to another halacha that has the same outcome. Another halacha that has the same outcome. And this is, remember we mentioned before, that there are other mitzvot that also have this concept of Parsume Nisa. Number one, we said, of publicizing the miracle. Number one, we said, is Chanukah candles. Number two is the Megillah. Now, the Megillah technically is free, right? You just go and listen to the Megillah. There's one more, though, that costs money. And that is, the last one on the list is the 4 cups of wine. 4 cups of wine for the Seder is another mitzvah that costs money that also has Parsume Nisa. Guess what? Has the same conclusion, that if a person cannot afford it, not an excuse. You have to sell the shirt off your back to get the 4 cups of wine for the Seder. Remember, like there's a classic story of the Beis Halevi. The Beis Halevi was the father of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, and at one point in history was the co-Rosh Yeshiva with the Netziv in the Volozhin Yeshiva before the Beis Halevi split off and went to go be the Rav in Slutsk in the middle of the 19th century. So the Beis Halevi, they tell a story of once someone came to him and asked him if one is allowed to fulfill the 4 cups of wine for the Seder using milk. And the Beis Halevi said, no, let me go get you some, let me go get you some money so you can make sure to have 4 cups of wine for the Seder. He comes back with way more than what was necessary in order to fulfill his 4 cups of wine for the Seder, twice the amount of money he needed. So his son asked him, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik asked him, why is it that he gave so much money to fulfill the mitzvah of the 4 cups of wine for the Seder? He could buy Kedem. He doesn't need to buy Shiraz wine. So he says to him, he says, no. He's going to go buy Kedem. But if a person is asking me if they can fulfill their mitzvah with milk for the 4 cups of wine for the Seder, that means they don't have enough money for their Shulchan Aruch, for their meal. They don't have enough money for matzah. So I want to make sure they have everything they need for the Seder, right? Amazing sensitivity. So there are scenarios that come up where a person mamish cannot afford the 4 cups of wine. It's a little more understandable than the case with the candles. But the same conclusion applies, that if a person cannot afford the 4 cups of wine for the Seder, they'd have to even go to the extent of selling the shirt off the back to get the 4 cups of wine for the Seder. Take a look at source number 4. This stems from the Mishnah. The Mishnah on page 2, the back side, side B. Side B tracks always have the gems, so we're going to get some of the gems right now. The Mishnah tells us in Maseches Pesachim, by the underlines, Lo yiftuchu lo ma'arba kosa shel yayin, that every single member of Klal Yisrael needs to have at a minimum 4 cups of wine at the Seder. V'afilu min hatamchu, even if it means they need to go collect charity to go fulfill their mitzvah. Take a look at the bottom of the page. The bottom of the source, by the arrow on the left side of the page. It's pointing to the Rashbam. On the left side of the page, there's an arrow pointing inwards towards the Rashbam. The Rashbam, Rabbeinu Shmuel ben Meir. He was the grandson of Rashi and finished his grandfather's commentary on the Talmud in a couple different places. He finished his grandfather's commentary to the Talmud. This is one of these places. So he writes in this commentary to the Talmud, he says that what's the scenario we're talking about? If you take a look at line number 8 by the underline, va'afilu hu misparnes metam poishel tzedakah, even a person that is completely sustained by the charitable organizations, the hainu, what type of a person is that? Just like everything in halacha, we have to give an objective standard. What is the objective standard of a person who qualifies for charity at this level? So says the Rashbam, quoting from the Mishnah Masechet Peah, the hainu ani sheba aniyim. We're talking about the poorest of the poor people, really the lowest economic class. The Masechet Peah, this is pointed out in Masechet Peah, line number 9, mi sheyesh lo mazon shtei seudot, that if a person can afford 2 meals a day, they don't qualify for this level of charity. If you cannot afford 2 meals a day, then you apply for this level of charity, that you can go and be sustained by the local charity organizations. Afilu hachi, line number 10 by the underline. Even that type of a person that can't even afford 2 meals a day, im lo natnu lo gabay tzedakah, if the treasurer of the tzedakah organization is not able to provide them, he ran out of funds. He's not the only poor person in town. He ran out of funds, and he does not have what to give him. Yimchar es malbusho, he'd sell the shirt off his back. O yilvet, or he'd have to borrow the money. O yaschar es atzvor, he'd have to go get a job. B'shvil yain la'arba kosos, just to fulfill the mitzvah of the 4 cups of wine for the Seder. Again, we have to throw our hands up and ask the question. I thought we're not supposed to spend more than 1/5 of our bank account to fulfill a positive commandment. Why is it that when it comes to these mitzvah, when it comes to the mitzvah of Chanukah candles, and when it comes to the mitzvah of having the 4 cups of wine of the Seder, if a person has to, Rahman al-Islam, God forbid, 1,000,000 times, I hope that throughout my entire career as a rabbi, and I hope that all of my colleagues throughout their career as a rabbi never are challenged with the question, if someone comes to them and asks them, Rabbi, I simply can't afford 4 cups of wine for the Seder, and I simply cannot afford the candles for the Chanukah, that I ever have to make a judgment on such a thing. But it is these 2 mitzvot that if such a scenario were to occur, a person would have to sell the shirt off their back to fulfill the mitzvah. It's counter to the entire concept of not spending more than 1/5 of your bank account, not making yourself bankrupt to fulfill mitzvahs. So why is this the case? So it is so Rav Elyashiv comments on that. Rav Elyashiv comments on that, and he says that if a person is in a scenario where there are other mitigating factors to them fulfilling the mitzvah, they'd have to go through every means possible to be able to fulfill the mitzvah, even if it means spending a lot of money to be able to have a residence for the week of Hanukkah. So not everybody agrees with Rav Elyashiv on this point. But nevertheless, the concept exists. You have to extend yourself as much as you can to fulfill the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles. So why is that the case when it comes to these 2 mitzvah? So there is an amazing explanation that really puts a real frame around why it is that Hanukkah is so significant, but what makes Hanukkah so unique and so special. Like the Rambam said, mitzvah chaviva hi ad meod. Beautiful explanation that's given by the Avnei Nezer, the Sakachav Rebbe. Sakachav Rebbe, we quote very often in this class. Sakachav Rebbe, Rabbi Avram Bornstein, born 1838, lived to 1910, was the Rebbe of the Sakachav community in Galicia, Poland. Born the same year as the Chavetz Chaim happens to be, even though the Chavetz Chaim outlived him by 23 years. Chavetz Chaim died at a very, very old age. He passed away in 1933. Sakachav passed away in 1910, was referenced by Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, who we said before was perhaps one of the most revolutionary Talmudists of the 20th century, was referenced by Rav Chaim Soloveitchik as a super genius. a super chair. If I call somebody a genius, not such a great compliment. When you have Reb Chaim Soloveitchik referring to somebody as a super genius, that's like Einstein calling you the smartest person I ever met. The Avnei Nezer was amazing, absolutely amazing. So the Avnei Nezer suggested the following explanation, answers up all of our questions. Let's review our questions very quickly. Number one, why is it that the Rambam said, what is significant about the fact that Chanukah is the most beloved mitzvah? Why did the Rambam say such a thing? Why is it the most beloved mitzvah? That's question number one. Question number two, why would a person need to spend more than a fifth of their bank account to fulfill these two mitzvot? The mitzvah of, if they are in such a scenario, the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles and the mitzvah of having the 4 cups of wine for the Seder. Question number three is, I understand that they both have the common denominator of Parsumei Nisa, publicizing the miracle. Why is that going to be the telling factor over the fact that you'd have to spend more than a fifth of your bank account to fulfill the mitzvah? So let's begin as follows to give the explanation of the Avnei Nezer. If you take a look at the last source, page number 2, bottom of the page, number 6. Source number 6, the Gemara in Kiddushin. The Talmud in Masechet Kiddushin has the following statement based off of a pasuk in Sefer Malachi. Rav Asi said the following by the underline. Afilu chishev adam la'asos mitzvah v'nanas. Let's say a person has every intent to do the mitzvah. They do everything they can to fulfill a mitzvah, whatever it might be. They do everything they can to fulfill a mitzvah, and it just doesn't come to fruition. They try everything. They tried their very best, and it just didn't happen. Whatever the scenario might be. Says the Talmud, v'lo asa, but unfortunately, you do not have the ability to fulfill the mitzvah. Ma'ala alav hakasov, the Torah views it, God views it as ke'ilu asa. It's as if you fulfilled the mitzvah. Person did everything in their might to have kiddush, and it didn't go. The bottle of wine broke, and none of the neighbors had, and whatever the scenario is, they just literally they could not fulfill the mitzvah. God views it as if they did it because they tried their best. I like to point to the fact that God looks at effort. I like to point to when in the poem of Yigdal. In Yigdal, we have the line of Notein le'ish chesed kimifalo, that God gives chesed, gives kindness, kimifalo, according to what a person does. V'notein l'rasha, and he gives to a wicked person, rasha kirishato. He gives to a wicked person wicked according to their wickedness, meaning God gives bad to people who are bad according to the bad that they do. And he gives goodness to those who do, it doesn't say good. What does it say? Kimifalo, according to the way they try. God looks at effort. God looks at effort. That is the main point of this Gemara. God looks at effort and gives credit where credit is due, not based on the result, but based on the effort that we put into it. Says the Sakhachev Rebbe, says the Avnei Nezer. He says, now, this concept makes sense, and you can see it making sense when we're talking about unilateral mitzvot. Mitzvot that are strictly between me and God and only have to do with mine and God's relationship. If it's a mitzvah that is beyond mine and God's relationship, but has to do with other people's relationship with God, so then it'd be hard to say such a thing, that God is going to view it as if you did it because you tried your best. It'd be hard to say such a thing. Why? Because while your relationship with God may have improved, but the mitzvah that you were assigned to do was not only about your relationship, but it had to do with other people's relationship also. And therefore, God can't say, I'll give you credit anyway. No, because no one else's relationship with God was affected. And the whole mitzvah was to help other people in their relationship with God. Says the Avnei Nezer, so then if that's the case, we can understand very well Chanukah and the 4 cups of wine for the Seder. Again, remember, these two mitzvot have a common denominator. They're both based off of the same principle, and that is Parsumei Nisa, publicizing the miracle. What's the purpose of publicizing a miracle? Why do we need to publicize the miracle? Religion's a private matter. I'll do my mitzvah, right? Shabbos. Is there really any direct impact on anybody's life here, whether or not I kept Shabbos? No one would know. No one would know anything. It might affect your life because the rabbi of your Orthodox congregation doesn't keep Shabbos. That very well could be. But if at 3:00 in the morning, this Friday night, while I'm feeding my daughter, everybody's asleep, nobody in the community is going to know. But just to make the time go, I'm going to listen to music while I'm feeding my daughter this Friday night. No one would know. Only God would know. It only affects my relationship with God. So then it must be then. The whole purpose of publicizing the miracle is to affect other people's relationship with God. Otherwise, why would God put into effect a God-based mitzvah that is between me and God? We're not talking about mitzvah between me and other people. We're not talking about giving tzedakah. We're not talking about charitable actions. We're not talking about chesed. We're talking about a God mitzvah, a mitzvah that is only between God and people. And he wants us to extend ourselves outward. When we have the 4 cups of wine at the Seder, it's like we're making a toast. And once again, bringing everybody up onto the same page of that we need to stop and give praise to God for these great miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim, of the Exodus of Egypt. We're bringing everybody that's in the table into their relationship with God to a higher level. So it's not only about me and my relationship, but it's everybody at the table. Hanukkah candles, the same thing. Why is it that I need to light my Hanukkah candles in a public place, in a place that's going to be viewed by many people? Because also, I'm trying to affect other people's relationship with God. Look at this great miracle that God performed. Look how amazing this is. Your relationship with God should be affected by this, should be changed for the better because you see the Hanukkah candles. So if that's the case, you can't say you tried your best. You can't say, you know what? You couldn't don't spend more than a fifth of your bank account. God would only say such a thing, says the Avnei Nezer, if we're talking about a mitzvah that's only between me and God. If it's only a mitzvah that is between my relationship with God and my relationship with God, but it's about affecting other people's relationships, we can't say, oh, you tried your best. No, it's not about just trying your best. It's about results. It's about people's relationship with God being improved. And therefore, you'd even have to go to the point, says the Avnei Nezer, of potentially selling the shirt off your back to get Hanukkah candles, not just for your relationship with God, but for everyone else's relationship with God. And the same thing for the 4 cups of wine for the Seder, because it's not just about your relationship with God, it's about other people's relationship with God. Based on this, we can understand a language that's a very hard language at first glance, a prima facie to understand, that's used by the Maggid Mishnah. If you take a look at source number 5 on page 2, the Maggid Mishnah, at the end of his explanation of the Rambam that we were discussing before about you have to extend yourself when it comes to the 4 cups of wine for the Seder and for the candles, for the Hanukkah candles, he writes at the end the following. He says, now if this applies to the 4 cups of wine for the Seder, kol shekain, it definitely applies for Hanukkah candles. Why did he say that it definitely applies for Hanukkah candles? I would have assumed he would have said, similarly, it applies to Hanukkah candles. Just like it applies to the 4 cups of wine, similarly, it applies to the Hanukkah candles. What does he say? He says, kol shekain. It definitely applies to the Hanukkah candles. Why? Because based on this concept, let's stop and analyze it again, says the Avnei Nezer. When it comes to the Seder, who's being affected? It's not just your relationship with God, but who else? Whoever's around your Seder table, right? Like it says in the Torah, he got to the bincha. It's about giving over the Masorah to your children, to the next generation, to whoever's around your Seder table. So who's being affected, frankly? Maybe 1, 2, 3, 5, whoever's there, 20 people, a big Seder, 30 people. Hanukkah candles, who's being affected? The whole world, potentially. Everybody. That's why the Maggid Mishnah says if this applies to the 4 cups of wine, it definitely applies to Hanukkah candles. Now we can go back and we can understand now, why is it that Hanukkah, as the Rambam said, is mitzvah chaviva hi ad me'od, is the most beloved mitzvah. Why is it the most beloved mitzvah? Because it's the only mitzvah that we do the whole year that's not just about my relationship with God. It's not just about my relationship with God and my family's relationship with God, or just my close friend's relationship with God, but it's the only mitzvah that is designed to affect as many people's relationship with God as you possibly can. That is the most beloved mitzvah. It brings the most amount of Jews into it. It's the mitzvah that is the most all-encompassing. It's a mind-blowing explanation. It's a beautiful explanation. It's why it's the most beloved mitzvah, because it includes the most amount of Jews. It includes the most amount of people in their relationship with God, in affecting their relationship with God, and bringing more goodness to the world. So now, let's go back to page 1. Let's try and understand then. There was one mitzvah that beat even Chanukah candles. Chanukah candles is the most beloved mitzvah. What's the one thing that beat Chanukah candles? That's right, the Shabbos candles. Why? The Gemara said, why is it that Shabbos candles wins? Shalom Bayis. Shalom Bayis is going to beat even the mitzvah that affects the most amount of people. Who does Shalom Bayis affect? You and your wife, family, kids. Brings it down to a very, 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 very micro level. Says the Rambam. He explains beautifully. Why is it that Shalom Bayis is going to beat everything? Why is it that Shalom is going to beat even this magnificent mitzvah of Chanukah that affects everybody's relationship with God?
Rabbi, the wife is going to be really mad if someone should perfect.
Oh, that's a good question. 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 That's a very good question. Okay. Okay. I guess it depends on your wife. Okay. So take a look at the Rambam's explanation over here. The Rambam says, line number 8 in that first source again on page 1. Line number 8 on page 1 on side A. Side A also sometimes has some gems. Line number 8, right, Marty? Line number 8. Halacha Yud Daled, in the middle of the line. He says, those two scenarios, Hayalafan of Ner, Beis of Ner, Chanukah, you have to make a choice between lighting Chanukah candles and Shabbos candles. Or another scenario, Ner Beis, beginning of line number 9, you have to make a decision between lighting Shabbos candles, V'Kiddush Hayom, or making Kiddush. So which one wins? Ner Beis Kodem. Your Shabbos candles win. Mishum Shalom Beis, because of Shalom Bayis, to have peace in the home. Why is it so significant? So take a look at the end of line number 9 by the double underline. That's how you know. Gadol HaShalom, because peace is so significant, it's so great. Shekol HaTorah Nitna, because the entire Torah was given just for La'aso Shalom Ba'olam, just to bring peace to the world. The whole purpose of the giving of the Torah was just to bring peace to the world. That's it. The whole, if you had to bring down the entire, what is the macro lesson of the Torah? The meta lesson of the Torah. What is the meta lesson of the Torah? What is the ultimate goal of Torah, of mitzvah, of all of it? Just to bring peace to the world. That's it. As we say every single time we put the Torah away. That its ways are ways of pleasantness, and its teachings are supposed to bring peace. That's it. That's what the whole Torah is supposed to be boiled down to. So what good would it be? What good would it be, to Brian's point, if one is going to be lighting Shabbos candles to affect the whole world? I want to bring everybody's relationship with God better. But at the same time, by doing so, you're going to be bringing unrest to your home, that there's no peace. It's counter to the entire Torah. It's counter to the entire goal of God. God would say, I don't want you doing Chanukah candles. I understand it's beautiful. You're affecting a lot of people. It's a lot of kirov. It's awesome, wonderful, beautiful. But it's counter to the entire purpose of the Torah. It's counter to all of it. I mean, how often do we encounter that? The people have their nose so stuck up when it comes to how frum they are. When it comes to, in order so that for them to fulfill a mitzvah, They're not going to care the people they embarrass along the way. They're not going to care about the people that they bulldoze in order to fulfill. They're not going to care. It's like the person that comes to shul and sees someone sitting in their seat and says, can you please get out of my seat? This is my makom kavua. This is my, and embarrass a person to say, what do you do? What do you mean? You have to sit in a makom kavua in your set place in shul. It's a Gemara in Brachos says you have to. It's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. I bring you every religious proof in the world that you have to. No. What about bringing peace to the world? That's the ultimate goal of all of it. So what good will Chanukah candles be if it's not going to do that? So hopefully, God willing, I saw something amazing just now. I was at home this afternoon. The kids are off from school, so I was brushing up on some Hilchos Chanukah. So I saw a beautiful tshuva from Ravadia where he quotes a remez. He quotes a remez, a hint. Thank you very much for stopping me the Zoom. I saw that for some reason my mic was muted. That Chanukah has the ability to bring Mashiach. Menorah Shmonas Yemei Chanukah, acronym for Mashiach. That the Chanukah candles, yes, because they can affect everybody. It could bring more. It could bring the whole world potentially under the umbrella of Torah, under the umbrella of bringing peace to the world. But as long as that's the way it's being done, if that's the way it's being done, so then without a doubt, Chanukah can be that's all we need. It could be the impetus for the bringing of the Mashiach. That's it. Because if it's going to bring more shalom to the world, it's going to bring more peace to the world, then there's going to be that kind of a macro peace that's affecting the whole world. So then that's going to ultimately bring the Mashiach. So, Ymirtz Hashem, God willing, we don't even have to necessarily wait for Chanukah for Mashiach to come. Hopefully this Chanukah, Mashiach's already going to be here, and we're not going to be lighting only Chanukah candles in our home, but we're going to be lighting the menorah once again inside of the Beis Hamikdash, because shalom, true shalom, has been brought to the world. Yeah, Brian.
So every male
that's next week's topic. Happens to be about the customs related to Chanukah candles, but it's a distinction between Sephardim and Ashkenazim. Ashkenazim, every bar and bat mitzvah girl above the age of bar mitzvah lights their own Chanukiah, and Sephardim, you only have one menorah for the whole household. Next week we're going to discuss what that's all about. We're going to discuss what that custom, the difference in custom, is all about.
Because your teenage son is going to be by
that wouldn't bring a lot of shalom to the world, would it, Brian? hopefully someone can splurge for him. Take from his allowance. All right. I wish everyone a lichtige Chanukah, a beautiful Chanukah, God willing. Next Wednesday on Chanukah proper, we'll have another class, God willing, of life's biggest questions. A lichtige Chanukah, everybody, that's going to bring shalom to the world.